I'm here in Mexico, right on the edge of the Caribbean. And just a few short miles across these waters is the island nation of Cuba. In many ways, this country has been isolated from the rest of the world for many years. And our Seventh-day Adventist family in Cuba has been isolated from the rest of the Adventist church family. But I want to tell you that encouraging things are happening in Cuba. And later in this program, we will be visiting Cuba and we'll be seeing a dynamic, growing Adventist church. And we thank God for what is happening in this country.
Just before he went up to heaven, Jesus gave us a command. He gave us a mission. Jesus said, "Go. Go unto all the world, telling them of His love." This is our mission. This is our global mission.
Hello and welcome to Global Mission Snapshots. I'm Gary Krause. For more than 20 years now, Global Mission has been focusing on the least reached people and areas of the world. On today's program, we feature an historic video that features the last interview given by Elder Neil C. Wilson, former president of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. I had the privilege of interviewing Elder Wilson about Global Mission, which started through his vision. I didn't know it at the time, but this was to be the last on-camera interview that Elder Wilson would give before his death. Also on today's program, video producer Dan Weber tells us about a Global Mission pioneer in Singapore holding meetings under a streetlight. We also visit house churches in Cuba, and we meet with Pastor Milton Adams, who heads up Simple Church, a house church network that started here in the United States, but is now starting to spread around the world. We often talk about the mission challenge overseas, and there are tremendous challenges in places such as the 1040 window. But even here, right here in North America, we have a mission field, and to talk about that with me is Pastor Milton Adams. Milton, thank you so much for joining us. You have a background as a church pastor. You, a few years ago, started looking at the challenge of the mission in North America. What did you see?
Probably one of the first things that caught my attention was some research that's done by Dave Olson, where he discovered that about 87% of Americans no longer go to church on a given weekend. And that, for my wife and I, raised a whole question of missionary work. How do we reach a culture that used to be Christian but has now turned back secular? How do we reach these people?
Now, many of our viewers may not be aware of this problem because they're probably living in areas where there are churches everywhere. How deep is this? I mean, is this a new phenomenon? What's happening?
America has a Christian background, and it has in name a nominal Christian background even still. But there is a growing disconnect between culture and the church culture. And people more and more are saying, I'm very interested in God, I'm very interested in spiritual growth, but if I have to go through the religious, don't misunderstand what I'll say, but the religious trappings to find God, no thank you. I will go to a different venue to try to discover who God is.
And so we often see people now talking about, well, I'm interested in spirituality, but not in the church.
Right.
So Milton, how in your experience, how did you respond to this? What happened?
Well, my wife and I looked at each other and we said, how do we reach these people? So the whole thing started with a missionary quest. And so we started just kind of an experiment in our own home. I had transitioned into a teaching environment, which allowed me then on weekends not to be tied up with a traditional church environment. And we said, we'll start a house church. Now, house church that we ended up calling Simple Church is not taking a conventional church environment, squeezing it through the front doors and expanding it.
Right.
It is a whole different paradigm that takes place, and it's primarily a relational paradigm that centers around ultimately sharing the everlasting gospel with people. but it is in an informal environment that breaks down the barriers for them to say, okay, I trust you, now I'm willing to take next steps.
Okay, so what you're saying is that there are people who would never set foot within the four walls of a traditional church, but they might be open to coming to your home.
Yeah.
So how did you start?
We asked one other Adventist family, committed family, to say, would you be willing to join us in this experiment? From there, it has grown. It is now a global network where committed people who are humble but who want to live the mission experience as opposed to the traditional go overseas to be a missionary. It's a way of life where you live your mission story in your own hometown, in your own apartment complex, in your own neighborhood. And that's part of the beauty about Simple Church, is that in environments where there is no presence, no Christian or Adventist presence, way out in the country, it is very plausible to use this. But even more so in the city environment, I'm told continually, over and over, we are having a more difficult time sustaining the cost factors in reaching these major cities. Simple Church doesn't have those cost overhead implications. And it's grassroots, it's simple, and it's done by lay people.
Now, so how many of these simple churches, home churches, are there now?
We are into about 3 years, just over 3 years, 3.5 years, and as of this morning, as of 2 days ago, there was 30, which is not a lot.
That's great.
But
Fabulous.
I looked this morning, we have 32, so 2 more have started. Just in the last couple days.
Now, these are Seventh-day Adventist groups.
They are Seventh-day Adventist groups.
Meeting in homes.
Meeting in homes led by lay people who have a missionary heart, which means I leave my comfort zones of conventional church, which is a challenge. But for missionaries, it's the norm. I fly overseas, I learn different language, I eat different food, new culture, I dress differently. We're taking those same missionary principles and applying them in the secular cultures of North America, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe.
Now, can you tell me an experience of somebody whose life has been changed through Simple Church?
I've gotten permission. I have to be very careful with stories because this is built in a context of trust.
Yes.
So many of these stories are too raw and they're too recent, but I got permission to share a story. There was a family who came from a background of one of the larger marijuana producers for their particular state. It was a very interesting scenario on how they ended up coming to our home, to Simple Church. Simple Church, at first they were very resistant, but once they realized that it was authentic, it was real, it wasn't look a certain way, act a certain way, they could be who they were in spite of their background. Over time, that family began to ask much deeper questions. The whole marijuana scene is now a thing of their past. The whole gator poaching, that maybe puts it into the south part of the United States, is a thing of their past. A couple years ago, they were baptized, and to see the change coming from very hard, secular people in the core, in the heart of much of the marijuana scene, and to see a 180-degree turn in their lives has just been incredible. But it's happened because trusting relationships were built in an informal environment.
Fantastic. Milton, thank you for sharing with us today. I appreciate it very much. Viewers at home, if you're interested in this home church movement, please just go to adventistmission.org. There you will see a Simple Church logo. You can click on there and find out more information, how you too may be involved in this movement to reach people who may not be reached in any other way, but to find a worshiping group in a home, in a relational environment.
Have you ever walked city streets and looked? Just looked. Looked at the people Jesus died to save. The words of Jesus echo down through the centuries. Go, go, go. Go into all the world and make disciples. In the late 1980s, the Seventh-day Adventist Church began looking at where the church was growing and where it was struggling.
My conviction was that we were coming to the close of time. It has become more and more certain to some of us that the church really does need global strategy.
After much prayer, study, and planning, the 1990 General Conference in session voted the Global Mission Initiative with one primary task: to start new Seventh-day Adventist congregations among new people groups and in new areas. In the past 20 years, the church has grown from 6 million to nearly 17 million. The incarnational ministry of global mission pioneers has established thousands of new groups of believers around the world. In the past 20 years, global mission religious study centers around the world have pioneered new methods and models to build fresh bridges of understanding, to reach out with compassion to the people of Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, and the world of the secular and postmodern. We praise God for the tremendous growth of the church. There are now believers in hundreds of new people groups. New countries and territories have been entered. The 1040 window has received far more attention and resources, and the church there has grown rapidly. But we're still here.
We've been told that it's not a time but a task that separates us from the coming of Christ. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations. Then will the end come. If we want the end to come, we want to finish the task that's been given to us.
The great purpose of global mission is even more current than it's ever been.
Today in 2010, we face an even larger global mission challenge than in 1990. We need a fresh and greater vision for the needs of the world. Once again, we need the power of the Holy Spirit to move us outside our comfort zones. We must find new and fresh ways to reach the unreached with hope. We need to recommit ourselves to look on the crowds with compassion, just like Jesus, our Savior.
When we look at the mission challenge that still remains, we cannot ignore the growing urban areas of the world. In fact, in 2007, for the first time in the history of the world, more people started living in cities than outside of them. My guest is Dan Weber, a video producer for Adventist Mission. Dan travels the world gathering mission stories. And Dan, you were recently in Singapore, which is a country which I guess is 100% urban.
Totally urban.
Yeah, just one big city.
One big, gigantic city.
Now, what is happening there in terms of mission?
It's a tough place to reach people. Very, very secular. Singapore probably is, you can consider it a Muslim country, but really it's a very secular country, and it's a very expensive place. It's a very hard place to get mission off the ground.
People are very focused on making money.
Focused on making money. The government sets up restrictions. The guy who was my host there and took me around was driving a 5-year-old car. And he said to me, "Do you know how much this car costs?" And I guessed $5,000, $10,000. He said $50,000. But he said, you have to have a license to be able to buy a car. And the license cost another $50,000.
Wow.
So he spent $100,000 on a 5-year-old car, and you're only allowed to keep the car for 10 years, until it's 10 years old, because they want everyone driving new cars. So then you have to get rid of the car and go through the whole process again. It's just an example of how expensive and how hard it is to get things done there.
And people are living in high-rise apartments, and even just to get access to talk to people.
Very, very hard.
Logistically very hard.
Yes.
Now, tell me about a project there that involved Global Mission trying to reach out to people.
I met with a pastor, Pastor Raj, and he went around, and there's a large immigrant worker community there. These are people who who come from overseas. The majority of them come from India and Bangladesh and Pakistan. So they're either Hindu or Muslim. And they're coming in and they pay a large amount of money to come over for 5 years. And then they're tied to a contract. They have to work for a company for 5 years. But they do this because they're able to send money back home to their villages where they're poor. But they're put in these large dormitories. One dormitory we visited had 15,000 people in it. And what Pastor Paul Raj has been able to do is he gets to go into some of these dormitories and meet with the people, and he's sharing Jesus with these immigrant workers.
Great. Now, you made a video of this project.
And I brought along. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah.
Several times a week, Pastor Paul Raj visits dormitories on the outskirts of Singapore. The men who live here are migrant workers from the countries of India and Bangladesh. They have left their families so that they can come to Singapore and earn money that they can send back home. Pastor Raj meets with them in small groups so that he can share the gospel. They trust him and appreciate his concern for their well-being. Many of them have become members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Thanks to you, Global Mission is able to support the work of Pastor Raj, and it is one of the many ways that he is reaching out to the people living in Singapore. Each Sabbath, a group of Indian immigrants meet in a rented room for church services. Most of them have recently arrived in Singapore and appreciate the chance to worship together with fellow Adventists in their own language. They enjoy singing together, studying the Sabbath school lesson, and then listen to a sermon from a lay pastor. Sabbath for them has become a true day of rest and Christian fellowship. But some of the migrant workers in the dormitories do not have the luxury of visiting church. Their jobs don't let them have Sabbath off. They are required to work so that they can fulfill their contract. For them, Pastor Raj has a unique solution. This is a streetlight church. Several times a week and each Sabbath evening, a group of migrant workers meet on the side of the road under a dim street lamp. The first few times they met, they were hassled by the police because it is illegal to gather as a religious group in such a manner. Pastor Raj then noticed that other groups were allowed to meet on the roadside and drink alcohol. The next week, the group showed up with bottles of juice, and the police have left them alone ever since.
Will do anything for you. You will be prosperous, you will have blessings, you have
Pastor Raj shares the gospel with the roadside group and gives them strength and encouragement as they face the hardship of working in a foreign land away from their families. At the end of the informal service, he gives them listening devices with religious recordings on them as a way of nurturing their spiritual growth. Each one of them is suffering as a modern-day Joseph, sent away to work in a foreign land. And Pastor Raj is there to lead them to the one who can fill the void in their lives. Your faithful support of Global Mission helps to fund projects just like the Streetlight Church. Please continue to pray for the thousands of Global Mission pioneers all over the world who are working on the front line of mission. To learn more about Global Mission, please visit our website at www.adventistmission.org.
Wow, that's a side of Singapore that most tourists don't see.
No.
They work long hours for
Yeah.
very low wages.
Yeah.
Now the pastor, just describe him for me. He seems a pretty energetic type of man.
Very energetic, little tiny guy, but then most people next to me are little tiny guys. Full of energy, has a real passion to do this. There's a couple of the dormitories he's allowed to actually go inside, but most of them, they don't allow any kind of religious meetings inside. So that's why they end up on this side of the road.
Now obviously he's an immigrant himself to Singapore.
Yeah.
So he may have
Yeah.
gone through a similar experience.
Yeah. He really understands what they're going through.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Dan,
You're
and
welcome.
sharing this story. And viewers at home, you know, that around the world today we have so many different types of people groups, different cultures, different languages, different backgrounds. And Global Mission finds ways to dress the gospel in clothes that people will understand. Not compromising, not breaking down the message, but making it appropriate and meaningful to people. So please pray for Global Mission pioneers on the front line of missions who are there sharing God's love in practical ways to touch people's lives for eternity. It's Sunday morning here in downtown Havana, and as I've walked the streets and taken a few photos and talked with some of the people through the limitations of language, it's like a different world to me. But I see these buildings and they're decaying, they haven't had the economic resources to keep them maintained. You know, you tend to get a little philosophical and you think about the goal of the restoration of God's image in humanity, and that's a goal that we are part of as we seek to fulfill the mission Jesus has given us to tell people about his love. And just further up this street, as we're just walking along, we came across this door and it had the Adventist Church logo on it. And I spoke to our translator and he explained that this was a house church. They call them houses of light here. So right here in the center of Havana, we have a group of Seventh-day Adventist believers who are sharing God's love. With the prohibition of new church buildings, house churches have sprung up all over Cuba as the church has grown. Local leaders estimate that the church has more than doubled and almost tripled since restrictions were loosened close to 15 years ago. These house churches also serve as a witnessing tool to the community. Lay members get to know those people living near the house of worship, inviting them to come and learn about a loving God who wants to fill the void that they have in their lives. The house churches are lay-led, and the members that share their faith do so with a passion that's contagious to those who listen. The Seventh-day Adventist Church in Cuba is growing. It's alive. It's making a difference in its community. It's reaching out. The church in Cuba has only one wish, only one goal. Thank you so much for your prayerful support of the mission of this church. Thanks for doing your part in helping tell the world about Jesus. Padre nuestro
santificado tu nombre aquí. Danos tu reino. Perdona mi pecar. Seas glorificado por los siglos. Amen.
The Office of Adventist Mission is constantly producing videos of mission from around the world, including global mission pioneers, overseas missionaries, medical hospitals, schools, and so much more. These go on our website and also onto a quarterly Adventist Mission DVD. If you live in North America, we'd like to send you a free sample of this DVD. Just call us toll-free at 1-800-648-5824 and ask for Adventist Mission DVD or offer number 303. Or you can visit our website and request offer 303. Don't forget to clearly state your name, full address, and be sure to mention Adventist Mission DVD or offer 303. Again, for your free Adventist Mission DVD, simply call the toll-free number on your screen, 1-800-648-5824, and ask for Adventist Mission DVD or offer 303. Or visit our website at adventistmission.org/offer 303. I hope you've enjoyed today's program and have been blessed by a glimpse into the life of mission in Cuba and around the world. Please pray for our brothers and sisters who are meeting in small groups in homes around the globe. And thank you for your continuing support of mission offerings and global mission. For Adventist Mission, I'm Gary Krause, and I hope you can join us next time for Global Mission Snapshots.